Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien, and I'm coming at you again from my backyard with another comic book thoughts video. The comic book countdown, super subjective of how I felt about these comics as I read them. Focused solely on the new comics I picked up this past Wednesday, the last week of July. And I only got 7, although several of them are thicker. Starting the countdown with number 7. Legion of Superheroes number 7, which I actually read consecutively with number 6. And this is always at the bottom of my list, and I finally gave in and cut it from my pull list after reading this issue. Because the next issue is some kind of special issue, I think, with every page drawn by a different artist. There's an ad for it somewhere in here. The Trial of the Legion of Superheroes, and I could care less. And I'm assuming that with this many artists as listed, despite some of them being great artists, it's going to be a mess. Cully Hammer, Joelle Jones, Dan Jurgens, Jeff Lemire, David Mack, Fabio Moon. It's Michael Allred. Michael Allred doing the Legion of Superheroes. Wouldn't that be great? But maybe I'll just pick it up off the shelf if it's not too overpriced, or I don't have a lot to read that week. But I don't want to be committed to this anymore. I can't believe that this is professional comics. I mean, it seems crazy because Brian Michael Bendis is a superstar writer. He knows what he's doing. He's written a book on how to make comics. But so much of it is like these endless word balloons, just one after another. And if you think of the wordiness of old Stan Lee comics, there was something about the placement of the balloons that even when they were kind of wordy and not, a lot of them were amusing, but not that essential to telling the story, they kind of guided you through the artwork in a way, and I think there was thought on that. But here, it's just an illustration and text, which is just separated out into some bubbles, just to make it seem a little bit more like a comic book. But there's nothing to hold on here and care about. There were a lot, in issue 6, there were a lot of action scenes, but it really didn't, the action did not visually read as much going on, and you couldn't tell really the significance of what had happened. Everything had to be explained after the fact in the word balloons to let us know what had actually happened. We didn't even see the big event of the Triton of Aquaman being used. I guess this is the event where it's happening, but I mean, you have no sense of what's going on and this culmination. Just every element, there's nothing to hang on to here. And, in this issue, the most recent issue, there's a whole lot of talk about kind of the politics of the situation, and you just don't care. There's been no emotional connection made with these characters other than glib dialogue that is mildly amusing. I bet there's other people who love this, because a lot of stuff Bendis does I don't like, but this feels like the worst Bendis comic I've ever read. If I didn't know it was by Brian Michael Bendis, I would think this is written by someone who doesn't know how to make comics work, especially pulpy superhero science fiction comics. So everything else is a lot better than that. But also a bit disappointing was my number 6, Symbiote Spider-Man Alien Reality. And even though it was written by Peter David, and maybe some of this is forced by the way the artist Greg Land does things, but there's a lot of pages that are just like a poster with some dialogue on them. Again, kind of just explaining what's going on. So it didn't feel like a comic book where things are acted out through a combination of a beautiful synthesis of words and pictures. I appreciate Greg Land's artwork here, but it's not comic booky. It's posters. I mean, maybe that was supposed to imply a big climax by doing it very posterized like this. Because, you know, for instance, doing it that way, a whole issue of single page panels was very successful with Birthright. So everything was just kind of wrapped up because it needed to be wrapped up, basically. And I'm going to need to tell my shot. It says the Symbiote Spider-Man will return. I don't know if that means another miniseries called Symbiote Spider-Man is back, or Symbiote Spider-Man, of course, is very important in the current mythos, given Venom's centralness to big events in the Marvel Universe. But I'm going to have to remember to, even though this miniseries is over, tell my comic book shop to remove it from my pull list, because they often assume that I want the next miniseries with the same title. In fact, they almost always assume that, which is fair enough. I mean, it would make sense from their point of view. If I liked the last one, I would like this one. But in the past, I've tried to... I've thought, well, that's the end of the miniseries. I don't need to take it off my pull list, but I do. Yeah, some cool pages. And another intriguing thing, I don't know where it goes much, but there's a lot of talk about God and the Word of God. And if you remove the Word of God, do you remove God from the universe? Or does God exist in the people, and the Word of God is inside those people, and they can bring it back out? And I thought that was interesting. And you don't normally see God... Well, I don't read a ton of Marvel comics, but I don't think you normally see God referred to in Marvel comics the way it is in here. So I just thought that was kind of cool and interesting. You know, I have my own private views on the whole God thing, but it doesn't really matter when it comes to comics. But so I just thought it was interesting that they played with that. Unfortunately, as a comic, this was kind of a letdown, and as a conclusion to the series, there were some interesting hints about the symbiote Spider-Man, and it's like part Spider-Man and part Peter Parker and part not Peter Parker. And I like that and wanted it to be played with even more. Oh well, it's done. I kind of had fun with it. Belly flop of the last issue is kind of a common experience in comics, I guess. But of course, does not get you ranked high in my all-important countdown. So that was number 6. In at number 5, much more fun read with a really cool cover. This might be my cover of the month, except for another cover in here, which is a reprint cover. But Colin Bunn, Andy McDonald, and Nick Filardi, the colorist, produce a very workable, creepy horror comic. It doesn't feel... It feels so deeply in that genre created by the movie Aliens that it doesn't feel that special in a way. So I don't feel as excited over it as I maybe do some other horror comics. It was actually a very well done version of this kind of thing. But maybe, the bottom line is, and maybe the problem with this kind of things is, you have this crew that are slowly being killed off in various ways, and you kind of, because you're familiar with this genre, they're going to get killed off, and not to get emotionally attached to any of them. And Colin Bunn just gives you a little bit here and there about each character, but he doesn't push the characterization hard enough to overcome that feeling of, I know they're all going to die, or most of them are going to die, so I don't care. Because in the cliche of this kind of story, there'll be one person left at the end, right? We'll see if that happens. Flipping through it now, I'm really loving the art, and especially the color. So it's not a comic I definitely want to see it through to the end, and I assume it's a mini-series. I can't see it going too long, but if they could surprise me. Rogue Planet is a great title in my mind, and in a way I think because I love that title, I wanted an even more sort of spectacular, fun, pulpy science fiction story to go with it. There was a famous science fiction novel, I think from the early 60s or the late 50s, that did it win the Hugo or Nebula? I'm not even sure, but it was a very well-regarded science fiction novel for a long time called Rogue Moon by Algis Budrys, AJ to his friends. And then in at number 4 is The Creeps, number 26. So that could be my cover. That's a Frank Frazetta cover, and it's a really cool one, although kind of a really strange one. This figure here is very odd. But I think I can't count, many times reprinted Frank Frazetta painting. So this would be my cover of the month. If I did cover of the month, stealing it from other people who do cover of the month. The idea of cover of the month got put back into my head by Bob from Everything Comics, because I had to pick out a cover of the month, or not of the month, sorry, of the week when I was on his show. So an interesting thing is there's a drawing of that same painting. They made a story to go with the cover painting. I don't know if they've done that before. I haven't noticed it. So I thought that was very clever, and really enjoyed the art. I think this artist, Nick Polowico, I think he's the one who often looks like Buscema, but here he looked more like I don't know, like a early Joe Kubert crossed with a little bit of Hal Foster maybe, or no, a little bit of Wally Wood maybe. It's a very short story with a fun setup and then a very sudden reveal in the very last panel. And that's the kind of thing all the stories are in here, the last panel twist. And and I have a lot of fun reading those. I kind of feel like, it doesn't matter if I were to miss an issue of The Creeps. I enjoy almost every issue of The Creeps I read, and this one had, except for maybe one story, all of the little twists worked, but the twists are relatively shallow, and ultimately they don't leave much of a mark on me as a reader. So I could miss one of these issues and it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't feel that FOMO of, oh no, I've missed some incredible story in The Creeps. But whenever I read them, I really enjoy them. It's a formula that just is fun for me and kind of escapist. So in a way, this is probably, most of this horror is not nearly as sophisticated as what Colin Bunn is giving us here in a longer form. I mean, all of these stories are about 5 pages each. The one actual criticism I have, though, is 2 of the stories in here in this black and white magazine kind of depend on color. One, I don't want to give away the twist of this one, but this one was about an alchemist turning things gold, or trying to turn things into gold, and that played a major role in the final panel or two. And it would have been really nice if we could see what had been turned to gold. So you only knew it had been turned gold by looking at the picture. I mean, sorry, not by looking at the picture, by reading the text. And then the very next story was even called The Man in the Yellow Shirt. And there's a man in a yellow shirt, as you can not tell which one, but one of these men is in a yellow shirt and he turns into a werewolf. And later, every time the character sees men in yellow shirts, he thinks they might be werewolves stalking him. And so maybe men in checkered shirts or something that you could have shown in a black and white comic would have made a lot more sense. This story was written by, the now deceased and much appreciated writer Nicola Cuddy, so I don't mean to put him down too much, but it seems like the story about gold, it would be harder to change. The other thing that never has a great impact is these obscure old horror stories that they adapt. They always have one adaptation, and I really want to like them. Like, I love people's adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe. But these are usually by horror writers I've never heard of, and the stories This one was actually better than usual. It's called The Screaming Skull. And I think this was the adapted one. Yeah, Spooky Tale from 1911 by F. Marion Crawford. Never heard of F. Marion Crawford. And it was an okay story, but usually they have to, the story's less visual and gets taken over by narrative. So I don't know, I don't want to say they shouldn't continue to tackle the old stories, but anyway, I had a lot of fun reading this. I now kind of understand exactly what I'm going to get from the creeps, and usually it delivers and it satisfies me. One thing I do think about reading this is because when I came to creepy as a kid, it had been going for a while. It actually had evolved, and yes, there were still twist-ending stories, but there were a lot of other kind of weird, creepy, and eerie stories in the Warren magazines by then. Whereas this seems, I guess because it's kind of a nostalgia magazine, it seems stuck in that one formula of the surprise last panel, which of course is the formula for EC horror comics too, as far as I know. So I don't know. I suppose if they evolved from that formula, maybe they would ruin it. But if they're looking at creepy and eerie as their guideposts, they might start adding other kinds of stories, such as recurring characters or sword and sorcery kind of things. I'm trying to, or more sort of deeper cut science fiction stories that started creeping into creepy and eerie. Let me take a short break. Let's see. That was number 4. And up next is number 3. Number 3 is also a horror comic, and it was excellent. It could easily have been a number 1 at any given time, but I guess the other comics I was up against, and maybe my mood for horror was not quite right. I actually read 3 in a row because of Plunge, and I'm making that my number 3 comic. I read 3, 4, and then 5, which came out this week. At least I think it did, because I got it this week. And this is that kind of horror that I get kind of afraid to keep turning the pages, but I can't not turn the pages. I have to find out what happened next. And I didn't have to read all 3 of these issues straight in a row, but I couldn't stop myself. And, I suppose it's an even more sophisticated twist on the whole aliens kind of thing, with other stuff more in the mix, but it does have like the evil corporate person along with the ragtag crew, but this time it's a crew in the ocean on a salvage boat, and they've gone to try to salvage this wrecked ship from 20 years ago, and it turns out that there are some weird body snatcher type of aliens who've taken over the old crew who are still there. Let's see. Yeah, kind of a spoiler. So if you read this in trade, hopefully you'll forget what I just showed you. But anyway, really creepy, and it takes then the body snatcher kind of idea in a direction that did surprise me and makes it even more creepy. There are some weird, cool, imaginative giveaways, but that don't seem quite logical. Like somehow this one guy his Walkman has been turned into a thing that makes him able to read minds, but in a really creepy way. I didn't understand that part fully. But anyway, it gets more and more gruesome, more and more desperate. And I think when Plunge first started, I found the Stuart Immonen art to be too just purely illustrative, and I felt it didn't bring me into the story enough. And I've lost that feel. I mean, I now feel like Immonen is doing incredibly good work and making this horror story really work and pay off. And of course, it does not hurt at all, or helps a lot, that the colors are by the great Dave Stewart of the Mike Mignola verse fame, the colorist who wins all the awards all the time. And the two of them just work together incredibly well. So I think it wraps up next issue. I dread it and can't wait for it. This is one that I think will read great in trades. Sometimes I'm realizing it's kind of hard to say for sure what reads best in trades and what doesn't. When I'm reading them in singles, I kind of make those guesses. It definitely read great reading these 3 issues together. But it might have been fine if there was the whole gap because of COVID, and I got off of reading everything in a row, and when I got my first copy of Plunge, I didn't plunge right in, just threw it on my stack of comics and went back to reading my omnibuses because I just wasn't into the monthly groove yet. So anyway, I think I'm starting to get back into it, and probably when Plunge 6 comes out, I'll have to read it right away. So another great comic in at my number 2 was Kill Lock, the final issue of this. And some really nice twists here. There were some twists in issue 5, and you might have almost thought issue 5 finished the story. But there's more to the story here. I debated in my mind making this number 1 rather than what is my number 1, despite the greatness of what is my number 1, because there's so many things about this comic Kill Lock that I like, and the delight of being surprised by a comic that I wasn't expecting to like, just because it's at first glance it looks visually like it's done by a storyboard artist rather than a comic book artist, and has the kind of visual aesthetics of a video game. But I got way past that and loved it, and there's all kinds of clever thought put into this universe of robots, and there's deep layers here, really, of a universe of robots that's not a good place, and how do you make it better? Can you make it better? And morality amongst what originally just seems like a group of criminals. There are, I'm not putting it at number 1 because there are things that just aren't totally clear here. The motivation of the person who turns out to be the robot who turns out to be the prime actor of what everything has gone on turns out to be. So it was an incredibly good twist, but that motivation is only half there. It's mostly there and you can read into it. I just wished I would get a little more. But I would love for Livio Ramondelli to do another 6-issue miniseries set in this same universe. Maybe with the same characters, maybe not. But maybe with the effect of these characters and what has been revealed about the universe playing a role. It's funny, on the back cover here, you can tell he really is sort of part of either the Hollywood or gaming world. I think he probably was a storyboard artist in games. But I've always been blown away by Livio's art and storytelling on Transformers, but seeing him script and world build at this level is a thrill. And that's from Chris Metzen, former SVP, Senior Vice President, I guess, Story and Franchise Development, Blizzard Entertainment. Epic, atmospheric, precise, graceful, dynamic. That's Livio. Pick it up. Flint Dial, Transformers and G.I. Joe. Creative lead, Niantic Lab Ingress. Video games, I assume. Livio's a great artist, but what makes Kill Lock so special is his remarkable ability to elevate character development beyond simple stereotypes. Yeah, like, it's amazing what he did with these robot characters, but it left me wanting more. And that's a quote from Tyler Blazinski, Transformers Galaxy's co-founder, Vox Media. Oh, and his blurb ends, "If there's one IP in comics to take a chance on, this should be the title." So what matters is someone... I don't think I want this as a movie. I just want more comics of this. If there were a movie of it, I suppose I would watch it. So, yeah, heady stuff. The top 3 here, amazing. They're all really, really great comics. And on Plunge, I wasn't that excited from the first 2 issues. I mean, I liked it, but I just wasn't. It wasn't like a top horror comic for me at that point. And now my number 1, kind of predictable. If you knew this came out this week, Pulp by Ed Brubaker. Short enough little story in hardback form that you can read it. Takes longer than a regular single issue, but it's like a double-sized issue, really. And it also makes some twists and turns that reveal things you at first didn't know about the characters. I don't know how much to give away, but we have our scene of cowboys, and it turns out to be an illustrated version of a story that's being published in the pulps that the creators here illustrate for us. It would just be in text in the world of this, and we meet the old writer who's writing it, and we make certain assumptions about him, and then we learn all kinds of new, different things about his past that are kind of surprising and a bit shocking. And we quickly have turned on our head our view of the Wild West. I mean, that's less surprising now, but still in the context of a pulp writer writing these pulp adventures, that was interesting. And then we have kind of a twist on what his family/romantic life is like. So it's very cool all the way through. I think, going in, I wanted more of a Western. I secretly wanted to see Brubaker and Sean Phillips actually tackle a full-on Western, and that's not what this is. And because another strong element in here is the rise of the Nazis, which is very interesting. And I knew that there was pro-fascist, pro-Hitler feeling in some parts of the United States. I didn't. It makes it seem like it was a bigger thing with rallies and things like that going on here in the U.S., and I didn't realize that. And I knew there was a lot of people, including Jewish groups here in America, who did not reach out and help Jews in Europe as much as they could have. Not that that particular issue comes up per se in here, but the sense of America not responding to the rise of fascism in Europe in the way we would like to, looking back on it. And, of course, with Brubaker and Phillips, it's a convoluted crime caper. It reads, despite the Western aspect and the pre-World War II fascist aspect, it ultimately reads like another great episode of Criminal with a different cast of characters and a different moral historical twist on it. So brilliant work. For some reason, I think of these little mini hardbacks that they've released so far, my favorite one is still My Favorite Thing is Junkies, or no, that's not what it's called. My heroes have always been junkies. But they're all good. They're all great. And this is, I love the idea of a hardback comic, to tell you the truth. Of course, back when I was a kid, I couldn't afford $16.95 for a single read. But anyway, a well-earned number 1 So all the top three all could have been number ones easily in any given week. So yeah, I feel quite satisfied. Especially talking about it again. I mean, Pulp put me through the ringer a little bit emotionally, and I think right after reading it, I thought, well, maybe I won't make this number one because it was a little depressing. And with the COVID virus and everything, I kind of want upbeat. And I suppose none of my top three here were actually upbeat. So that's the one problem. That's one reason why I'm reading a lot of Asterix with my daughter and Gru and Millie the Model. And I kind of look forward to that to a degree more than all these adult comics. I was watching, I think it's the first in a series of mini episodes by Chris Sarda, Chaos and Comics, about covering the Eisner nominees, I think for short story category. And I was thinking that the one he showed, that's like a literary short story, probably one that is memoir or memoir-ish. And while I feel like the future I see in comics is moving away from superheroes to a degree, which is ironic now that superheroes rule the movies, but it is still pulp. It is adult, sophisticated stuff that interacts with the idea of pulp, not just little slices of real life. And are all the awards eventually going to go away from the pulp stuff? I kind of feel like, when I was really into fiction, I was into science fiction, I was into fantasy, I was into horror. It was pulp. It was not considered serious art by the people who decide what serious art is in our culture. And so this whole world of these kinds of things may, along with superheroes, get bypassed. I mean, I hope not. Because I think it's a really rich area of the human imagination. It's just not character first. It's idea first, and then if it's good stuff, great character also. But it's got a crime, and it's got a shootout, and all of that stuff too. And I think the combination of that, for me, has a lot, somehow, ultimate in the long run. I mean, I enjoy your every now and then a slice of life, but in the long run, my brain is more stimulated and tickled by these other elements mixing in with reality of character. So, just the title Pulp, just, whoops, microphone falling down, just connected that video I just watched a little while ago by Chris in my head to all of this, because I've in my writing life experienced a lot of pseudo prejudice against the writing that I liked. And it's not like real prejudice, like what black people or Hispanic people or whomever suffer in our society, but there is that sort of parallel there. So part of me would be sad if, I don't know, we may end up with a pulp ghetto in comics and a mainstream of literary fiction in comics, which depresses me to think about. If they could stay just mixed together and no one distinguish between the two and say one is good and one is bad, then that would be great.